Good evening, Peter Racy here. It is the 2nd of October, Friday night, and I am doing an analysis or a critique of Priya Vaughn's presentation to the Power Institute, a formal arm of the Sydney University. So let's hear the formal introduction.
We have Priya Vaughn, who is a lecturer here at the National Art School in the Department of Art, History and Theory, which has many fine lecturers, but Priya is one that I suppose she sits in kind of different departments around Sydney, and so we're very lucky at the University of Sydney to also have Priya contribute to our program as well. I'm not going to let Naz claim you wholly, Priya.
Okay. This is a paper that has an intent to, I think, in effect, discredit the work that the Caboolture Historical Village did in the restoration, discredit the efforts of the young lad, Kurt Jones, and really discredit the work of the World Expo 88 Facebook page and Foundation Expo 88 YouTube channel. And you might say, well, that's a long bow. However, I think that the paper is a little bit prejudiced. And I think that if we go and have a look at the question and answer session, you'll get a bit of a feel as to why I think that. So let's just hear one of the questions.
To these objects, there's also this sense of something left undone, a residue to be worked through.
I think that's a really interesting observation, and you're so right that what I didn't get to talk about is that, in making the space for Expo 88, Aboriginal people and others, mostly relatively new migrants, were kind of unceremoniously removed from the space that it was put up in. And
the answer is wrong. If the answer had been that World Expo 88 was going to dislocate people due to economic pressures from rent increases in the West End area, that would have been the correct statement. But there was no one that was dislocated from the site itself. It was a third state government owned, a third Brisbane City Council owned, a third private enterprise, commercial. There were sand processing facilities on site. There were some pubs. They may have had some accommodation functions attached to them, but in those days, they were really out and out dives. So there was no, sort of mass dislocation from the occupation of the site. So now I would like you to listen to the actual introduction, which I think was a very fair introduction. So let's listen to that.
In early 2018, in the lead up to the 30th anniversary of World Expo 88, two large Australia signs, created for the Australian Pavilion at the Expo by Ken Doan, were advertised for sale at a college in Brisbane. The cost, $5,000 for both. The college was turning the cow paddocks on which the signs had sat for almost 30 years into an oval, and they had to go. Kurt Jones, a student at the college who'd always loved the signs and the particular slice of Brisbane history that they represented, set about trying to find an institution which might wish to save them. And
goes well, and I haven't loaded up the full details, but I've put up next is the conclusion. And the reason I did that was because it has some more fundamental errors in it. First of all, the Lord Mayor of Brisbane was Sally Ann Atkinson, not Atkins. And secondly, the function that the ABC broadcast was on the Thursday, and the official unveiling was on the Sunday. That wasn't covered by the ABC. And also, there are a couple of other minor technical errors in what is said. And they those errors go to the substance of the issue, because it didn't take several months for the Caboolture Historical Village to organise the funding of it. It was done almost instantaneously. The local community come on board very quickly and very strongly. And that was the reason why, in less than a 6-month period, those signs were able to be moved, restored, put back up, and then the functions arranged. Greg Riddell from the Caboolture Historical Village did an incredible job, as did the whole team of volunteers. And I just don't think there's a steric of justice being paid to them from the way that it's presented. Now, next, let's just have a look at this.
Only after months of searching, a buyer finally, so an anonymous donor basically purchased the signs on behalf of the Caboolture Historical Society. And despite the difficulties and the costs associated with moving and reviving them, the signs were restored, repainted, and put on display at the Caboolture Heritage Village just in time for the 30th anniversary celebrations of the Expo. Restored to their former glory, indeed looking pretty well exactly as they had when they flanked the entrance of the Australian Pavilion in '88, the installation of these signs was a cause for celebration. Local ABC radio broadcast live from the village for the opening. Ken Doan, the signs designer, and Sally Ann Aitkins, who had been the Lord Mayor of Brisbane in 1988, both officiated, and an enthusiastic crowd looked on.
So I'm going to show you an excerpt out of the paper. It occurred about halfway through, and the meat of what's the presentation is now starting to be exposed in the argument. And that basically is that the bicentenary itself was disingenuous to Indigenous people, and that may well be a very fair argument. That the Expo 88 authority effectively ignored that issue, and that is not true at all. I would refer anyone to the art collection that John Truscott curated, the Art of Central Australia, that then went on to be the centrepiece within the Convention Centre, and then was the centrepiece of the G20 room, and is now a major tourist attraction because that art collection, that superb art collection, has featured in 2 of Brisbane's major world events over the last 35 odd years. And then it's Indigenous art. So let's just have a look at this. Now, I haven't put in the full ad, but I have put in, I think, the damning summation that Priya makes. Now let's just watch.
While the Australian Bicentennial Authority, the group charged with organising the national celebrations, were beleaguered by the impossible task of sugarcoating Australia's colonial history, Queensland institutions managing the Expo sought to sidestep these issues. Historian Rachel Sanderson has observed that Expo was marketed as this kind of cosmopolitan, globally oriented party that was, and I quote, almost entirely divorced from any historical, political or social context. And to illustrate this, because we all need a video because it's so late, I just want to show you this classic advertisement of the...
Have you arranged your Queensland holiday yet, so your family can experience the main event of our bicentenary?
Need I say more?
Priya's played the ad that related to attempting to get visitors to this private enterprise expo that had to break even. I mean, that was the purpose of it. It was sold that way. Malcolm Fraser, when he was Prime Minister, didn't want to have a bar of an expo in Brisbane, didn't think the country could afford it. It was repackaged and remarketed to be a net no cost to the federal government World Expo to celebrate the bicentenary. That's what was accepted. That's what their objective was. That's what they were working towards. So to use the ad that was to drum up business, to say that, you know, it's disingenuous to Indigenous people, just ridiculous, just really stupid. Now, moving along, let's delve into the next part, and you're going to see in the next part Priya analyse the Ken Dane letters. So let's just have a listen to that.
In view of these histories, let's return to the Australia signs and consider what they represent and how they embody meaning. In a recent interview with The Guardian, Ken Dane sort of used a list of adjectives to sum up how he sees Australia. He said colourful, exciting, open, friendly, and not so serious. And I think Dane's description of Australia is simultaneously a sort of a description of these signs. It reflects while their form and design do this figuratively. The U is being eclipsed by a smiling cartoon sun. The S is a wave crashing towards the shore. The T, a palm tree. The I bearing the blue stars of the Southern Cross. Here is Australia distilled down to what are perhaps its most idyllic parts: sun, surf, swaying palm tree, and above it all, the Southern Cross glimmering in a star-studded sky. We have...
So, okay, am I being overly sensitive? Am I precious? Am I a jerk, in effect, by criticising the presentation? I don't think so. Ken Dane was approached by the architect of the Australian Pavilion, a pavilion that had to be demountable, a pavilion that was a real challenge to an architect that had to come up with something that was strong and had a strong statement, encourage people to go into the pavilion, left a good feeling after they visited it, and was, you know, a real help to the holding of the World Expo. He approached Ken Dane. Ken Dane gave him some advice. Ken Dane gave him creative input. Ken Dane therefore created those signs, which were done in such an extraordinarily unique way. They've ended up as art. They didn't start out as art. They've ended up as art. And so therefore, to say that they don't reflect upon the cultural values and don't give due credit to the Indigenous culture during the bicentenary is just a load of waffle. I mean, really quite unbelievable trite, to be honest. Now, the final part of the presentation, let's just hear that and we'll talk about that after.
View of conflicts occurring around the bicentenary, we might even read the U as conciliatory, a kind of spruiking for a diverse but harmonious Australia. But this is a vision of diversity that can't accommodate what anthropologist Anna Singh has called the grip of encounter. Setting aside the obvious ethical issues connected with the appropriation of Aboriginal cultural properties, the U flags, even celebrates Aboriginal presence in Australia, but does not and cannot acknowledge tensions, histories and contestations that were core to cross-cultural engagements with the bicentenary. None of the friction, what Singh calls the awkward, unequal, unstable and creative qualities of interconnection across difference, are included in the vision of Australia embodied in this sign.
The letter U fails in the objective that Priya is trying to infer upon it. And this is a sign that was made to last 6 months. This was a sign that was going in front of a demountable building for a 6-month exposition that no one had any idea was going to be even remotely in existence 30 years after the event. It was simply a happy touchstone, a joyous celebration of the bicentenary during a World Expo where we're putting our best foot forward to the people of the world where Queenslanders were trying to build a tourist industry to employ people up and down the coast, out the west. You need to remember that the Queen opened the Outback Hall of Fame the day before she opened World Expo 88. I mean, a major tourist institution was opened by the Queen at the same time. This was all about building industry, building tourism, building the footprint. But I will readily acknowledge, and I've spoken to Salu about this, and he acknowledges that, yeah, in hindsight, with better resources, some of the aspects in relation to the Indigenous community could have been done better. But Rick Birch and the entertainment team went out of their way to employ a lot of Indigenous art. I mean, have a look at the themes within the parades, the street parades. And again, coming back to one of art from Central Australia that ended up being in the G20 room. I mean, again, it's like the Australia sign. It was a short-term collection that was put together that I don't think anyone in the wildest dream would think that, President Obama, the first, black president of the United States, would be standing, admiring and giving praise to the art that was on the wall at the convention centre, some 28 odd years later. So please just give me a break. I think Priya needs to be praised for the intellect that she's brought to bear in the argument, in trying to raise Indigenous matters of importance. But I really do think that using the Kendo and Australia signs from World Expo 88 is something that's going to hold water. The argument pours out of it like water out of a sieve, to be honest. Thank you and good evening.